Before today, Mount Everest was considered as the highest peak on our planet. However, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to inform you that there is a new peak. Invincible Season 3, Episode 8. It's not often that I start clapping while watching a show. However, throughout this episode, I must have rewinded certain sections like 5 or 6 times because I really wanted it to sink in. The fight itself had so many parts to it that it kind of felt like they were broken up into little sections. You had the initial interaction, then Mark fought back and kept getting his shit rocked as per usual, and eventually other people started showing up, which made the stakes even higher. When Oliver was getting pulled apart, by the way, that's when it really hit me. That's when I cemented how fucked up this motherfucker Conquest is. You can read about it in a comic all you want, but the noises Oliver makes while it's happening made me wince, and it's not easy to make me do that. Not to mention the collateral damage. I also don't know what it is about Viltrumites and using people as human shields, but the fact that it happened to Mark twice, it's pretty unfortunate. I also don't assume anyone is going to have any complaints about Conquest's voice either, since some of the line delivery here is so good that I felt intimidated. Like, thank fuck I'm not in that universe, because bro is over here saying he's going to kill me while I'm standing 100 meters from him. Hell no. They did a great job in conveying that he's playing around with Mark. Even though he gets hit his fair share of times as well, you never feel quite convinced that he's out of it. Though the fight in the show is a bit better than it is in the comics because they gave Adam Eve a fighting chance. In the comics, she's in and out without really doing too much, but in the show, they really display her ability to fight. Here, she actually fought pretty well. She did do the panes of glass thing again, which I just don't understand. She's just not that creative of a person, I guess. Her ability to change the air density and create her own armor, by the way, the air density thing was so freaking cool, but these things show the potential of her power, so I can't help but feel that she's not being used to her complete potential. And it's kind of like the Green Lantern problem. They can technically imagine anything in existence, and yet they make these basic ass weapons. She should be able to tear apart anyone at a molecular level. Granted, they did explain that she has certain mental blocks that prevent her from doing that. She was also never trained, so even in the comics, she never quite reaches her full potential. Not to mention that she has to be able to perceive what she's doing at a molecular level and intentionally manipulate it. I could go on for a while about that, but simply put, when you have a character with her powers, it can be a double-edged sword. It also wouldn't be very interesting if she could just think someone out of existence, but all in all, I was geeking out when I saw her holding her own. Though perhaps the writers took that concept and tripled it for Mark because this motherfucker might just be invincible with how much he's dealt with. He had bones sticking out of his hand and leg, watched Oliver get wringed out like a towel, saw Eve get punched through her fucking body, and had her face looking like Rihanna's. Mark also might actually be the first guy to have been in his girlfriend's guts and literally see them. This guy also does so much harm to himself and everyone on Earth by pulling punches that I genuinely can't understand why it took him so long to accept that sometimes you have to put a motherfucker down. I also hope that he wasn't pulling his punches until the very end, because there's no way anyone has enough resolve and patience to give someone else that much respect. To be fair though, he did hold his own. When I saw Eve, I thought they were going to change how the fight panned out, but I'm glad she had her part. But Mark put Conquest down for good. Or, well, so he thought, but we'll get into that later. In the meantime, we have to give Steven Yeun his flowers for giving his all in the line delivery department. I mean, he nails every iconic line from the comics, and you can tell he's taking this so seriously, especially when Conquest said, "Got more than enough fight left in me for you, boy." And Mark said, "Not enough, not nearly." Like, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this shit, not because my rendition is terrible, but it just reminded me so much of Spider-Man because he has that fight and resilience to him, and that's one of many reasons why I love this character. Mark is just so compelling. Even when he gets his ass beat by the dumbest villains, you know that he'll show up when he needs to, and it's something that makes him I've done a couple of videos on this show and haven't done that yet, which I'm kind of surprised that I haven't used, but I felt that this was the perfect opportunity. The immersion that this show brings is due to a multitude of things, but particularly because the voice actors step up big time. It does take away from the animation budget, sure, but being able to enjoy these interactions, whether small or big, makes it feel so much more significant. Again, Jeffrey Dean Morgan proved everyone wrong, I would say at least. It's really the little things that made him so much more menacing. I found it interesting too that they added that part about Conquest being lonely and nobody wanting to be his friend. At first I thought it was a bit forced to make him seem somewhat less of a monster, but after thinking about it, that gave him even more depth and made his motivations seem a lot more sadistic because he is self-reflective and still chooses to do this. And I don't mean it in a following orders kind of way, rather he does these extracurriculars, to put it lightly, which gives off the impression that he's not just some mindless war machine, he knows exactly what he's doing and still revels in it. It's like he's fully aware of how messed up he is, but instead of trying to change or even justify it, he just leans into the carnage because he enjoys it. That's what makes him a lot scarier. He doesn't kill because he has to, he kills just for the love of the game. Alright, now let's talk about Cecil. Episode 7 basically handed him a gold star for all his paranoia. Everything he's been doing to build contingency plans, fine, justified. The war made it pretty obvious that Earth is a sitting duck without some kind of backup plan. It was fucked up and it proved that Cecil's whole "we need to be ready for Mark" ideology wasn't just paranoia, it was necessary. Fine. But then episode 8 happens, and suddenly, Cecil's obsession with control goes from reasonable caution to actively creating problems. Because Mark thought he killed Conquest, and honestly, I like the little detail of him asking to see the body. He wants to be certain that Cecil's not going to pull a fast one on him. But at the same time, Mark should have known better than to just leave the body in his hands like that. No one is really gone unless they're disintegrated. And this is where Cecil's contingency plan mindset goes a little too far. It's one thing to be prepared for the worst, it's another to keep a literal ticking time bomb in your basement and act like that's somehow a smart idea. But what is the best case scenario here? Maybe Cecil thinks Conquest's body holds valuable intel, maybe he believes he can study Viltrumite biology or come up with a new weapon using whatever's left of him. But why would you risk keeping him around? If there's one thing we know about Viltrumites is that they don't die easily. Hell, Nolan survived half his organs being turned to mush in season 1 and still came back. And if you had to bet on whether Conquest is actually staying dead, well... So yeah, episode 7 proves Cecil is right, there absolutely needs to be a contingency plan, but episode 7 proves that his way of handling things isn't bulletproof either. He's so obsessed with preparing for disasters that he ends up creating new ones. And if keeping Conquest locked away instead of making sure he's gone ends up screwing Earth later, I don't want any of you Cecil Dick Riders to say a word. But it's great to have this parallel where neither of them are correct and they're doing things for their own reasons that isn't necessarily nefarious. However, I'm less inclined to lean into Cecil's direction because he already showed to Mark that Mark cannot trust him, and now Mark is going to trust him even less once he uncovers what happens eventually. Now, even if this episode had zero dialogue, it still would have been devastating just based on the way it was animated. Every impact, every broken bone, every pained expression, it all had weight. Conquest in particular was animated in a way that made him terrifying even when he wasn't moving. The way he would just stand there menacingly watching Mark struggle to get back up made him feel like more of a force of nature than just another villain. And when he did move, it was with a level of confidence that made it clear he never once doubted that he would win. There are two scenes that actually stood out to me in particular, and those were when Conquest made that little heart out of his blood. I was like, what the fuck is this guy made out of? And then there's the scene where Mark is pushing him through the air, and then Conquest just stops mid-fight. I'm like, this dude is a different animal. Eve's powers also looked super good here. The way everything shatters and how she builds her armor made her presence feel even more powerful. But again, the animation didn't shy away from showing her limits. Even when she was at her strongest, she still looked vulnerable, and when she went down, it was fucked. There was also another moment that I just remembered. It's when Mark was looking at a pool of his blood, and then it started shaking before you even saw Conquest. I just thought that was a really cool detail. So season 3 didn't just end with a fight, it ended with a statement. This episode took everything that the show had been building toward and pushed it to its breaking point. Mark wasn't just fighting Conquest, he was fighting the inevitable truth that his old way of thinking, his belief that he could save everyone without ever crossing the line, just wasn't gonna cut it anymore. But it's not just Mark who's changed. Eve, after nearly dying, is realizing that her powers, while incredible, might never be enough to protect the people she loves. Oliver, after being ripped apart, or just about, knows now that he's nowhere near as ready for war as he thought he was. And then there's Cecil, who, yes, he was proven right in episode 7, still manages to completely screw it up in episode 8 by keeping Conquest's body. And what's even worse is that the Invincible War, the Conquest fight, isn't even the biggest disaster that Earth is gonna face. That shit was just the warm-up. Conquest isn't really gone. The Viltrumites aren't just lurking in the background anymore. They're coming. Angstrom Levy is still out there. Battle Beast is alive. And the Sequids are literally waiting beneath the surface for the right moment to strike. So with everything that's been set up, season 4 isn't just going to be bigger, it's going to be even darker and even worse for Mark. If he thinks that this is the end-all be-all, you don't know what's coming, dog. But at least now he can kill, and hopefully he isn't going to get packed up by Powerplex or some other bums anymore. So there is a silver lining. And that just about wraps up today's video, ladies and gentlemen. This episode was so crazy, and I've already watched it like 3 times, and I just can't get enough of it. So I'm gonna watch it a couple more times before I'm sick of it, if that's even possible. I do have some more Invincible related content coming out in the near future, so stick around for that. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and consider liking and subscribing if you like this type of content. And at any rate, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, make sure to take care.